All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Iowa Learning Farms webinar. My name is Elena Whitaker, and I'm the Water and Conservation Educator with Iowa Learning Farms. Today, we've got Dr. Richard Roth with us. He's an assistant professor and extension nutrient management specialist here at Iowa State, and he's going to be talking about the nitrogen toolbox, from cycling to rate tools to late season decisions. If you've got any questions at any point during the presentation for Dr. Roth, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of his presentation.
I know you just lost.
Okay,
Uh,
yes, I was going to say, wait.
yeah, I know you just lost. I don't know. I don't know why it's not cooperating. Well, now you can probably see the presenter view, right?
uh, yes.
All right, let me do that. That's what I wanted. All right.
Perfect.
Um, Thank you everybody for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. My goal really today is just to kind of um, cover some of the recover some of the basics of the nitrogen cycle, talk about some of the tools that we have available to us, both to estimate some of the processes of that cycle, as well as getting into some of the tools that we have for rates. And then finally, the last thing that I'll touch on very, very briefly will be just late season nitrogen applications. So to start, basically anytime I talk about nitrogen, so if anybody in here has ever seen me talk about nitrogen, I always start with the nitrogen cycle itself. So you can see there's a lot of different processes, inputs, losses, transformations that occur within the cycle. And so I'll try to simplify it for you a little bit. So in this purple box here, this is going to be our additions. Anything that might add nitrogen to the system. The yellow box is going to be our transformations, so different microbially driven processes in the soil that can result in, not nitrogen changing from one form to another. And then finally, we have kind of our losses that occur, are highlighted in red. And we're going to talk about each of these different portions, the additions, transformations, and losses as we move through today. And so we're going to start with the addition. So that was that purple box on the diagram. And this one is going to be the simplest of them all. So how do we add nitrogen to our soils? It's pretty easy. There's three main pathways. Number one is the addition of fertilizer. That could be synthetic fertilizers. That could be organic fertilizers like manure, compost, or other types of amendments. And then also the return of crop residue. So that could be cash crop residues, or that could also be cover crop residues. We also have atmospheric nitrogen fixation. So this would be the process by which lightning breaks the bonds of nitrogen in the air, and it converts it into um, nitrate, which is carried into the soil by rainfall. And then we also have biological nitrogen fixation. So this is it can be symbiotic or asymbiotic. The most common thought pattern here is legumes, right? Legumes fix their own nitrogen. That's a form of symbiotic nitrogen fixation. So that's really how we would add nitrogen. There's maybe some other ways, but these are the primary pathways by which we add nitrogen to the soil. The next set of processes or steps in the nitrogen cycle that I want to talk about are the transformations. So that was that yellow box on the diagram that I showed. And the first that I'm going to talk about is mineralization. So this is very simply put, it's the conversion of organic, non-plant available nitrogen to inorganic, plant available nitrogen, right? So think about it as soil organic matter or crop residue being processed and releasing out nitrogen that the crop can actually use. And so this process is driven by microbes. It does technically, it has multiple steps in it. But really all you need to know is that we're going from a non-plant available form into a plant available form. Now, this process, this mineralization process, is also reversible. And so when microbes are breaking down organic nitrogen sources in the soil, in order to do that, they actually need nitrogen to break down those residues. And when the microbes need extra nitrogen to help break down the residues, really the only place that they can pull it from is going to be the plant available nitrogen pool. And so when these microbes take that nitrate, that NO3 or the ammonium, the NH4, and assimilate it into their cells, basically to help break down these residues, we call that process immobilization. So it's taking plant available nitrogen and it's being stored in that microbial cell, which is no longer available for crop use. Um, and so this process, this mineralization and immobilization process, these processes are really, really highly driven by what we call a carbon to nitrogen ratio. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to share with you all one of the tools that we have available for helping to estimate soil nitrogen mineralization rates. So if you go to Google and you Google ISU facts crops, the first website that should come up is our forecast and assessment of cropping systems website hosted by ISU Extension. And if you go under the soil conditions tab up at the top and you click on soil nitrogen mineralization, what you'll come up to is this soil nitrogen mineralization rate map. And so this map is produced by Dr. Sotirios Arkantoulis. It's updated Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday of each week. And it is basically what it is showing is how many pounds of nitrogen are being mineralized per acre per day. And you can flip back and forth through kind of historical maps that exist. The thing to note on this, right, is as the more blue the area is, the greater the mineralization rate that we expect to have in that area. We've had pretty good rates this year. As you scroll down the page, you can look at historical rates. The black line is always going to be the 40-year average. The blue line is going to be the previous year, and the red line is going to be the current year. And you can see we've been relatively higher than last year, or at least on the same pace. And again, this would be this final image would be cumulative, and you can see again we are experiencing near record mineralization this year, right? So that's just a tool that you can use. You know, if you're questioning how much nitrogen am I actually getting from the soil at any given time in the year, it's a good useful tool to have. So as I mentioned, mineralization and immobilization, those processes are driven by what's called a C to N ratio. So this is very simply put, it's just the amount of carbon per every nitrogen that is in a given residue. Okay. And so generally when we think about residues, again, whether that's crop residue, cover crop residue, soil organic matter particles, right? Everything has a carbon nitrogen ratio. And when we think about this in terms of how well are these residues going to break down, kind of our key number is going to be about 24 carbons for every nitrogen. So if we have more than 24 carbons per nitrogen, we consider that like a lower quality residue. You're probably going to end up with net immobilization, right? So the removal of plant available nitrogen into an unavailable form. If you're below that 24 to 1 threshold, you're going to generally get net mineralization, so the transformation of organic to plant available. So to put that kind of visually, This is just some research that was done in the past where they looked at cover crop residues and how kind of the rate at which they decompose and break down and how C to N ratio drives that. So what you'll notice in that figure on the left is you'll see three curves, and rye, that's cereal rye, is at the top, and then at the bottom is going to be crimson clover and hairy vetch, and these are both legumes, right? And generally speaking, legumes have lower C to N ratios, and you can see that in the table on the right. The rye was at 36 carbons per nitrogen, and then the legumes were at either 8 or 13. So the rye was above that threshold that we talked about. The legumes were below it, and you can see that the legumes, because it had that lower C to N ratio, released nitrogen significantly faster and more completely than the rye, right? So the availability of nitrogen from residues is highly driven by that C to N ratio. So the next process that I want to talk about in those transformations is going to be nitrification. And so very simply put, this is the conversion of ammonium, so NH4, into nitrate. Okay. And it is a two-step process. There's an intermediary there called nitrite. Um, but a couple things that I do want to highlight about this process is number one, it doesn't matter what your source of ammonium is, right? Whether you're putting an ammonium-based fertilizer, whether you're putting manure, or you have cover crop residues that after they break down and that organic matter is decomposed, it's releasing ammonium, which is then going to undergo this nitrification process. Okay. And so this process is highly driven by both soil temperature and soil moisture. So this process slows dramatically. Like it doesn't go to zero, but for all like kind of uh, practical purposes, it is as close to zero as you're going to get once those soil temperatures drop below 50 degrees and stay kind of on that downward trend, right? So this is why one of the reasons why we have this standing recommendation to apply anhydrous ammonia in the fall when soil's temperatures drop and stay below 50 degrees, because this process slows way down, and we're able to keep the majority of that nitrogen in the ammonium form versus converting over to the nitrate form. Um, Moisture also controls this because the bacteria, the microbes that are responsible for this process, are what we call aerobic, meaning that they need oxygen in order for this process to occur. So, if you're in extremely saturated conditions, this process will slow down. Uh, and I just said oxygen is important, right? But also, if you're in extremely dry conditions, this process can also slow down a little bit because obviously microbes are living organisms and they also need some water to fulfill their processes as well, right? And so the end result of this is our nitrate, and that is what we hear about all the time. It's susceptible to leaching into our waterways through our tile systems. But it's also vulnerable to denitrification, which is the loss as gas. And so if we think about trying to prevent these processes, right, what we want to do is we want to keep as much of that nitrogen in the ammonium form as long as possible. And so to do that, we have these products called nitrification inhibitors. So this is another tool in our toolbox to help us hopefully get better utilization of what we apply. And so these nitrification inhibitors, they attack the first step in this nitrification process for a couple of reasons. Number one is because like the process can only move as fast as the ammonium can undergo that first process. But there's another reason, and that is because nitrite, that NO2 that's in the middle there that you see, that's actually toxic to plants. And so if we targeted the second step, what we would end up with is a buildup of nitrite in our soils, which we don't want. And so we target the first step. That way, what amount of ammonium does make it through to that nitrite can finish out and become nitrate in our systems, which is a form that plants can actually use. And when we think about uh, nitrification inhibitors that exist on the market today, there's really there's basically three primary active ingredients that exist in our commercial products that are out there, and that's going to be nitropyrin, which is in name brand products like Inserve or Instinct. There is DCD, which is becoming a more popular active ingredient amongst a lot of co-ops uh, because sometimes it's a little bit easier on equipment depending on how it's being applied. Those that can be found in things like Source DCD, Function. I'll be honest, most places have kind of their own house brand of DCD, so you'll find it. The key there, if you're going to use DCD, is that you want to make sure that you know the concentration and get the highest concentration possible to get the greatest efficacy. And then pronitridine, so that is going to be Centuro, from Koch Agronomics, and they just recently released some new versions, basically new formulations called Centuro A Pro and Centuro U Pro. And essentially, the difference between the newer formulations and the old formulations is the new ones are 44% of concentration, and the older formulation was 14. But on a rate by rate basis, you get about the same amount of active ingredient. There's also some others like humic acids, calcium polysaccharides. Some people even think that ammonium thiosulfate can give us inhibition. Um, there's there's not much research on those types of products, and what little is out there are really highly variable and not very consistent in what they provide. So just use caution if you are thinking about those types of products. So I just talked about, we might use those products to help keep the nitrogen as ammonium so it doesn't transform into nitrate, which can be lost. So I want to start talking about those losses now. So there's three main loss pathways when I think about the nitrogen cycle. The first is volatilization. And so this actually is the loss of ammonium, so that NH4 from our fields as gas. So there's a lot of risk factors that can contribute to ammonia volatilization. There's fertilizer factors such as source, so urea and ammonium-based fertilizers like UAN, also manure can be at higher risk for this volatilization because there's more ammonium in them. Placement, if you surface apply, you're at highest risk. If you incorporate, your risk drops dramatically. Obviously, the more you put out there, the more ammonium is available to volatilize. Things like pH, temperature, moisture, CEC, residue management, all of these factors can contribute to increased volatilization risk. So I think the key here is, and I'm going to get into this on the next slide, but there are some tools and some methods that we can use to help minimize this, right? But we can lose a lot of nitrogen this way, up to 10, all the way up to 40% of what we apply, depending on these different factors, right? So some tools that we can use to help mitigate volatilization would be incorporation, right? So obviously we can't control the weather. I wish I could, but I can't. But if you can, try to plan any type of surface application prior to a rainfall. And when I say a rainfall, I mean at least a half an inch. That'll help move a lot of that ammonium nitrogen into the soil. And so, your risk goes down. You can mechanically incorporate, right? So you can work it in. That really helps your risk of volatilization go down. And you can also, if you're using a urea-based fertilizer, something like just urea or UAN, things like that, you can use a urease inhibitor, which can give you 7 to 14 days of protection against that urea converting over to ammonium, which would then be susceptible to volatilization until you can get that rainfall or you can get out there with your tillage equipment to get that fertilizer worked into the soil. The next loss pathway that I am going to talk about is called denitrification. And so this is the loss of nitrates to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas, right? So this is really it's going to happen the most in saturated soils. So it doesn't typically happen even across the field, but we all know those spots in our fields that pond, and those are the ones that are most susceptible to denitrification, especially if they stay saturated for multiple days. And when it happens, later into the season. So as the soil temperatures increase above about 55, the rate really starts to ramp up. So to put into context how much we can lose, um, I want you to kind of look at these tables that I have. And like I said, how long you're saturated is a really key factor, the temperature of your soil, and the fertilizer source that you're using, right? So depending on the fertilizer source, it may or may not have converted to nitrate at the time that you get saturated. If it hasn't, that's that's good news, right? You have less nitrate there, susceptible to loss. But what I want you to focus on is the table on the right. Um, you know, as temperatures increase, you can lose, anywhere from 2 to 5% of the nitrate in your soil in that saturated area per day that it stays saturated. So again, we can lose a pretty significant amount of nitrogen to the atmosphere, even though a lot of times we talk about rainfalls pushing it through the soil into the tile, right? Uh, so let's talk about that. Nitrate leaching. It's nitrate moving with water through the soil. It hits our tile lines or other forms of groundwater, and then we end up with the water quality issues that we all hear about. And so when we think about tools to help reduce that leaching, there's in-field practices like nitrogen management and increased cropping intensity, but there's also the edge of field practices that are super effective, like constructed wetlands, wood chip bioreactors, buffer strips, things of that nature. And you can find all of these and kind of their estimated reductions in the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. Okay, so that's the nitrogen cycle. I want to talk just briefly about some tools for estimating nitrogen requirements. There's a lot. This is not an exhaustive list, and I'm not going to talk about all these. But the first one that I do want to talk about is InFact. So this is the new nitrogen fertilizer application consultation tool produced by the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative. So when you get to the website, which is in-fact.ag, you can go, if you click on the on-farm trial results, you can choose your region. It's going to load all of the data. You can filter it by all of the columns that you see there. Probably one of the most useful is filtering by previous crop, which is what I'm doing here. I'm going to filter by previous crop, I'm going to set it to corn, which is going to give us all of the continuous corn data from the INI on-farm trials. So as you scroll down, you'll have this, what we call a histogram of economic optimum nitrogen rates. You can see they range anywhere from, 120 all the way up to 265 pounds of nitrogen. But the median value is what you should be looking at. So 181 pounds of nitrogen. So that gives you a starting rate of, okay, this is about the average rate for my area. So then you can go to the other tool at the top called Estimate Your Rate. Here I'm going to pick Story County, but you would pick your county. It'll give you the data that is feeding into it. I'm going to just do continuous corn. I'm going to do all of kind of like the average settings as we move through. You select your uh, crop rotation, your post-harvest nitrate, um, your planting date, and your weather conditions, and then you can input your fertilizer prices and corn price if you want to. You can play around with that. You hit estimate, and it will bring up this curve, and you can scroll down, and underneath is going to be listed your EO and R. So we're looking at that average number there, 177. So on the left-hand side, you can play around with your inputs. So for instance, here I changed planting date, and you'll notice we dropped from 177 to 156. So the later you plant, you might need less nitrogen. We reset that. Maybe we change our soil nitrate to the low category. You can see, okay, we have low soil nitrate when we go into the season. We need more nitrogen, right? So it's a very useful tool, but remember that you start with looking at the on-farm trials to get a base, and then use the estimate tool to kind of see how different factors at play. So planting date, crop rotation, nitrate levels, and weather could shift your nitrogen needs either up or down, depending on the change. Okay, so the other tool that I want to talk about very briefly is going to be the late spring nitrate test. So we have a really excellent extension publication on this. It's ISU Crop 3140. So I'm not going to talk super in depth on this, but just know that this is a 1 foot soil sample collected generally in mid-June. You want to make sure that you sample by mid-June. About 16 to 24 cores make up a composite within a given management area. And then once you send these to the lab and get your results, you can then use the new late spring nitrate test calculator that was developed in order to help determine your nitrogen rate. So earlier we went to the FACTS website, right? So we're going back to that same ISU forecast and assessment of cropping systems site. And this time we're gonna choose the late spring nitrate test at the top. And so as we do that, you'll notice this is the calculator that we have. And so the first thing you'll see here, this is where you would input your test results. So you input your nitrate ppms that you get back from your soil sample. So let's imagine that we have 10 ppms. You can adjust what your acceptable yield loss is. So what I mean by acceptable yield loss is like, if I don't apply any more nitrogen, how many bushels am I willing to lose versus, let's say, a normal year, or your average yield, your APH, whatever. And then on the left, you have your probability of yield increase. So what that means is whatever the odds that you see a yield benefit from applying based on your test results and your acceptable yield loss. And then on the right is going to be the rate that is suggested that you apply. So again, a very useful tool for those interested in using the late spring nitrate test. Okay, and finally, this is a wall of text, so don't try to read it. I'm going to tell you what it says. But let's just very, very quickly talk late season applications. So let's imagine that you can't get a pre-plant, or you have a planned side dress application. You can't get it. It rained. You can't get into the field on time to get it done. Can I still make an application in the late vegetative stages? Let's say V12, V14. Heck, I've even seen people do it as late as tasseling, right? So the answer is yes, with a few caveats, right? So like you need to understand that by the time you get to that point in the season, if your crop has experienced stress, like I can't, no application that you make can change the fact that that crop has already experienced stress, right? So if it has experienced stress and it has maybe, yield potential has been adjusted due to that stress, it's not going to recover any lost yield potential. But what it can do is it can help you maintain yield potential at whatever yield potential level you're at the time that you make the application, right? So, the good news is that newer hybrids are using nitrogen deeper into the season versus older hybrids. So we do have a window kind of in that that late vegetative, early reproductive stages where we're still taking up nitrogen and utilizing it. So that is a good thing. Most research that I've seen versus other applications, they do show often maybe a little bit better nitrogen use efficiency because we're putting it on during active crop uptake. And generally you can maintain yields, right? This is a that's always good news, right? Now, obviously, if you don't have access to high clearance equipment, it makes this difficult to do. And the other thing to consider is that often we're applying on the surface when we make these applications. And so we talked about earlier some of the tools that we might use to protect those surface applications. And especially if you're making these applications late June, early July, when temperatures are hot, maybe we're not getting as much rainfall to help wash things into the soil. Really, we should be considering those tools to help us protect that fertilizer. Okay, so what are the takeaways from today? So nitrogen is constantly cycling, right? It's undergoing transformations that are driven by microbes, and those microbial transformations are driven by carbon and nitrogen ratios, soil moisture, soil temperature, a bunch of different factors. So the soil is not a stagnant thing, right? There's always things going on in the soil. We have tools that can help us protect our nitrogen that we do apply, and then also help us define rates. So soil tests, canopy sensing that I didn't even talk about, like remote sensing, the different calculators. So InFact, the LS&T calculator, and then also just using those 4R practices that have probably been hammered into you more times than you can count. And then finally, late season applications, they're another tool, right? If you do them correctly, they can help. But you have to make sure that you have the equipment available. Try to time it with rainfall, things of that nature. Okay. So with that, here is my contact information. Feel free to call or email me anytime, and also that QR code that's on the screen goes to my lab website where we do post research updates throughout the year.
Perfect. Okay, if we could do those last couple of slides. So thank you to our key partners for making the Iowa Learning Farms webinars possible. So we've got the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, so the DNR, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Next slide, please. If you are watching this webinar and would like to get a CCA CEU, go ahead and email me, Elena Whitaker, at alenaw@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. So just email me with your name, the name you entered to watch this webinar if it's different, and then your CCA number, and we'll get you submitted for credits. Next slide. If this is your first Iowa Learning Farms webinar of the year, we would greatly appreciate it if you could fill out a voluntary demographic survey. Totally voluntary. One response is all that's needed again for 2026. So if this is your first one, go ahead and fill it out. You can find it on the QR code by scanning that, or iowalearningfarms.org/survey. And then I think I've got a couple more slides here. Yes, so next week, if you have enjoyed this webinar and want to learn a little bit more about specifically manure management, but manure management in and with cover crops, we've got another one of our Beyond the Basics Advanced Cover Crop series interview style. So it'll be Dr. Daniel Anderson along with Dr. Matt Helmers talking about manure and cover crops and perennial cover crops and things like that. So people can ask a bunch of questions, and it'll be a more laid back style webinar. And then I've got one more slide here. If you've watched today's webinar and would like to see it again, or any of our previous webinars, you can find them in our archives. You can watch them ad-free on our website at iowalearningfarms.org/webinars, or you can also find them on our YouTube channel, Iowa Learning Farms Webinars YouTube. We have them organized by playlist, so this one will go into our nutrient management playlist and things like that. So then you can watch all nutrient management webinars we've had from the last few years. So feel free to explore that. Otherwise, we do have some questions. If people have more, please keep submitting them to the chat. But our first question is, so near the beginning of the presentation, when you were showing minerals, the tool to help look at soil mineralization, this
Hmm.
person is wondering why we're experiencing near record nitrogen mineralization this year. And then are there key factors that play into mineralization rates?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, are there factors that play into mineralization rates? Yes. Soil moisture and soil temperature. I know I said it about everything, but soil moisture and soil temperature are really heavy drivers of mineralization. I mean, obviously along with soil organic matter, right? The higher the organic matter that you have, the more that's at least there available for it. Why are we experiencing near record mineralization? I, so this is a fun question, and I encourage anybody on here to ask Dan this next week as well. But because we've been talking about this a lot, we've had really good conditions, generally speaking, for mineralization. We've had rainfall across most of the state, at least, kind of regularly that has helped maintain soil moisture. Um, we have pretty good soil temperature, obviously, that has helped maintain um, microbial activity in the soil. What is it like this year and last year versus some of the past years and the last 40 years? I don't have an answer for that. But uh, you know, generally speaking, we've had adequate moisture and solid temperatures kind of throughout that have helped sustain mineralization.
Okay. Um, the next couple, we had some people asking questions about the inhibitors that you were talking about. So, to what extent do these inhibition products like pay for the farmer? Like, do we know how effective they are at actually inhibiting the transformation to nitrite and then nitrate? Can you add anything to that?
Uh, yes. So I see multiple questions in here. So I'm going to try and answer all of them here.
Okay.
So to what extent do they pay? That is a wonderful question because obviously that's a key point in any operation. The short answer is that they may not pay every year. I mean, that's just the truth of it. And the reason why they may not pay every year is because, again, none of us can predict the weather, right? And um, things like mineralization, nitrification, and also leaching and denitrification are all highly driven by the weather. And so, um, if you get a year that is abnormally dry, right, it's very unlikely that an inhibitor is going to pay off in terms of a benefit, right? Um, on the flip side, if you get a year that is abnormally wet, especially let's say like right after you apply, or even so in some of my research, I've seen extended benefits of these products. And so if you get a year where conditions are like ideal for nitrification and leaching and denitrification and all of these processes that would lead to, potentially less nitrogen in the soil. Those are the years where sometimes you'll see the yield benefit. And the way that I often would tell people to think about these these inhibitor products is like car insurance or health insurance or home insurance. Um, like you always have it even if you're not always using it, right? But that one time where your kid breaks their arm or you get rear-ended or what or you get into an accident, and you actually need to use it, it helps, kind of cover itself. And so when you think about the inhibitors, I mean, if you get a benefit, 1 out of 4 years, depending on the level of yield benefit that you get, it can maybe pay for it. In terms of how much does it keep out of the waterways and the groundwater, again, that it's weather dependent, but I have multiple research sites that were just started this year to look at this specifically. So I can't answer that question 100% right now, other than in the past, research has kind of been variable, with some showing that they don't do much, some showing that they do quite a bit. But it also depends on soil type and things of that nature. So I don't have a solid answer now, but hopefully in the future. And then there was one other question related to these that asked about are they considered bactericides?
Yes.
So that's also a wonderful question. So in theory, the answer is no. So the active ingredients are not supposed to be active like bactericides or bacteriostats. So the idea or what has the claim, right, is that the only thing that they're doing is interacting with the active site on a specific enzyme inside of the microbe where ammonium would enter in order to be converted over to nitrate. Um, I actually am about to start some work on this too to answer this very specific question because I have the same question. I do want to know how it affects the microbial community, and if there's any unintended consequences from these. But so the only thing that I'll say though is like the most common use of these inhibitors is with anhydrous ammonia. And anhydrous ammonia itself is a bacteriostat. So when you apply anhydrous, like you're in that band where you're applying anhydrous, you're going to kill a lot of the microbes, right? Because when you apply anhydrous, there's a really quick pH change, and that causes some issues. But our soil microbiome is quite resilient, and so it can often bounce back relatively quickly. But again, that's another question that I'm going to try and answer is how fast does it bounce back?
Nice. Okay. So another person is asking if ponding in the field can cause denitrification of urea, then why are people putting it on before rain? Do they also run the risk of leaching in more sandy soils where it might not pond as much?
That's a good question. So can I stop sharing so that I can stop looking at this black
Yes,
screen?
go for it.
Okay, so that is a good question. So when we think about urea, actually the threat for urea is not necessarily denitrification. It's volatilization, which is the loss of ammonium as like ammonium gas to the atmosphere. And so the reason why we like to put urea on prior to a rainfall is because the rain actually helps work the urea into the soil, and once the urea is like inside of the soil, then that risk of losing ammonium to the atmosphere is it basically goes to zero. It's not zero, but it's pretty close. So as we time it with the rain, it helps push it in, and it does kind of like that natural incorporation for us. Now, are they at risk of leaching on a sandy soil? Any nitrogen is at risk of leaching on a sandy soil, right? And so it just depends on how much of the fertilizer that you've applied has actually made it to nitrate by the time, rainfall occurs, which then can leach from any soil, but we're even more prone in sandy soils.
Okay. I think we got time for maybe one, maybe two more. We'll see. What are your views on variable rate nitrogen?
I think it's a good idea. I think not everybody has the technology yet, and we also haven't necessarily figured out the proper way to determine uh, like rates for different zones, right? There's a lot of debate. Everybody has kind of their own idea. Some people base it on like historical yield maps. I think that's one way to do it, but obviously, um, like your yield map could change depending on like weather within a given year, right? Other people will use soil properties. Even other people will do like soil testing. So um, there's a lot of potential ways to go about doing it, and like there's no real agreement on any one way is, the perfect way. Um, I tend to think that probably like if we're going to do it, but the most effective way to do it is going to be some kind of combination of like aerial imagery, so like drone imagery or satellite imagery, coupled with like some soil factors that we can include, things like soil type, organic matter, things of that nature that can help uh, that. But yeah, so I'm working on that as well. But for right now, I think it's a good idea. I just don't know that there's a like a 100% correct way to do it yet. Yeah.
Okay. I think we got time for one last question here. So they're asking if they've got a corn on corn rotation, um, when should a cover crop release the end for the crop? So like what would be the best cover crop for a corn on corn rotation? Because you had that one slide that was kind of showing rye versus the two legumes. So do you got any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I do have thoughts on that. Yeah, so pretty much my entire career before I came to Iowa State was focused on incorporating cereal rye into different cropping systems. And the short answer is that rye is really, really good at taking nitrogen out of the soil, and it really, really sucks at putting it back. And so, in a given year, you might expect maybe about 15% of what's in the rye to become available at any point. The good news is that we've seen through research is that if it does become available from the rye, it generally gets used. But but if you think about if you have 40 pounds of nitrogen in your cereal rye and you only get 15 pounds back, you're talking 6 pounds, right? So it's a very small, kind of almost negligible amount. And in fact, I think the bigger concern is potential immobilization of plant available nitrogen as the microbes try to break it down, right? So there are some things that we can do to overcome that, things like starter nitrogen and and all kinds of different things. And it's not all just immobilization that causes the issues with cover crops. Honestly, and in an ideal world, if we could get legumes to grow in our systems, that's what I would try to shoot for. Something like a hairy vetch or a clover, which is going to fix nitrogen, have a lower C to N ratio. So maybe you avoid some of these immobilization issues. Maybe you get some of a higher amount of that nitrogen back over time. Again, I'll have actually answers to that probably by like December, um, at least from a lab setting. And we're trying to do some of it in the field as well. Um, but again, I think the issue is that a lot of times it can be hard to get some of those legumes to grow at our more northern latitudes, like we have in parts of the state. Not that I don't, it's not that it 100% can't be done, but there's a lot of considerations to do it, which is why cereal rye dominates the landscape across the entire country as a cover crop because it'll grow pretty much anywhere. And the other thing that we don't know with these legumes versus the cereal rye cover crops is with cereal rye we know that we get like a very significant benefit in terms of reducing nitrate losses to streams and groundwater and things like that. With the legumes, we don't quite know yet, right? Like legumes don't make all of their own nitrogen. They absolutely use some from the soil, but we don't know, like in terms of like a water quality benefit, what that looks like. What it looks like, for sure relative to cereal rye.
Okay, perfect. Um, I think that was most of the questions. And so just for interest of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here today. So thank you so much for presenting today, Richard. And if you would like to earn a CCA CEU, go ahead and email me, Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Otherwise, thank you all so much for tuning in.